In today's episode, I have a friend of mine, Rick Shurtz. How you doing, Rick?
Hey, I'm good, Eric. I appreciate you having me. It's fun to be with you today.
Yes, well, you and I go way back, last several years
Yes.
since I got here in Austin, since 2010.
Okay, I was
Most
going to ask.
recently,
I couldn't remember what year it was, but
into
it's been,
2010, that's right, is when we first met. And most recently, you are now my pickleball nemesis. And uh,
yes,
But I,
yes,
but I thought before we jump into what you're doing now, I thought it'd be great to hear about some of what you learned over the last several years. We were together, and in about 2016, you
yeah,
got a call to go back to Willow Creek. You were part of Willow for years.
yes.
Talk about your experience as you went back up there.
You jump right into the deep end, don't you? Yes. So yeah, I was at Gateway from 2006 to 2016, and then went. I'll say back to Willow because I'd been there previously. I was there from 2016 to 2020, and without question, the hardest years of my life. Just absolutely tough, and we won't have opportunity to get into all of that, but can get into some of it. If you follow what's going on in churchdom, as I imagine many of your listeners do, 2018 is when Willow took a massive hit with some things coming out with Bill. And so, yeah, I feel like I stepped right in it, and it was quite an experience for sure.
Well, and I think part of what, as you and I have kind of gone back and forth about your
Yeah,
experience, one of the things that you said I thought was so helpful was the comparison of your first experience,
yeah,
Willow, and the most recent. Share with everybody what you shared with me.
yeah. That's been an interesting lesson for me. So I was at Willow in the mid '90s. It was I was in my 20s at the time, and was part of a ministry starting a Gen X. That was when Gen X was cool, right? And so we started Access. I was on the team that launched the Access ministry, a ministry for 20 somethings. So I was there in the mid '90s. I think we punched out about '98, something like that. And that group that I worked with grew up into leadership, right? So they were 20 years later leading the church. And so 2014, 2016, around that time frame, they started talking to me about coming back and basically doing what I got to do at Gateway, do a similar thing at Willow. And it's given me a unique view of things, I would say, because it's like I have a two images: the Willow of the mid '90s and the Willow, I don't know how you say, the mid teens, the 2016s. I
Yes.
don't know how to do that, but it's two very different churches. And in the '90s, it was like so mission focused. I mean, the Willow's famous mission statement to turn irreligious people into fully devoted followers of Christ, that very concise, punchy statement. It was I mean, we didn't get tattoos back then, but we might as well have. It was tattooed on everybody's forehead. I remember there being a time where I had to fill out a form explaining how my job aligned with the mission of the church.
Wow.
And everything was about alignment. Everything was, are we on mission? We had a very clear strategy of this is what we're going to do, and this is a mission, and here's our strategy, and this is our vision. I mean, it's all that language, and it mattered. It made a difference, and you could just really feel the pulse of the church. A lot of people coming to Christ, and all of that. Go forward 20 years, and a lot of great things were happening in the church. Don't get me wrong. It's an amazing church, still is an amazing church, but I didn't feel that same passion. We didn't talk about the mission like we did before. There was not a clear strategy. It was very different. And I would say it's one of those situations where you go from, you have this mission, and it's, to reach the lost and, talk about the gospel and share Christ with people. And the good thing is that it works, and this church gets built up around it. The challenging thing is now you have this church to manage, and in this case, a very, very large one. I mean, when I was there in the '90s, I'm going to make these numbers up. They're probably not exactly right. I think it was like 16,000 people. Yeah, they're in the teens. It was 30,000 people. It was a big organization, multi-campus, all of that, as many people know. And so the challenge was, what I observed is the church itself ultimately then becomes the mission. So instead of the church having a mission, the church becomes the mission. And it's like, how can we be organizationally strong? How can we lead well? How can we organize well? Rather than how can we be on mission to reach our friends with the message of Christ? Not that that wasn't being said, but that's not what was felt. What was felt was very much instead of how do you save your neighbor? It's how do we save the church, because the church was struggling. And that's not the mission of the church is not itself. That's institutionalism. And so when you get to the place where you're trying to save the organization, you've lost your purpose for why the organization exists in the first place. And that's a challenging thing to do. It is very subtle. And I please don't hear any judgment in my voice. I'm as guilty of it as anybody. But it definitely, seeing those two 20-year apart pictures, it was palpable, the difference between the two.
Well, and I think that insight's really important. Are we focused on the mission or the organization that used to be
Yes.
on mission? There's so much been written about what happened in 2018.
Yeah.
I would love to just hear from your vantage point as someone that was in the middle of it. I mean, you were part of a church that was, huge, big staff, and then suddenly lots of layoffs, all the changes. Looking back these last several years, how would you describe, or I should say it like this, what are some lessons you think all of us could learn from what happened with Bill Hybels and Willow Creek?
I love that question much more than what really happened, because we could be here for days talking about what was said and what wasn't said and all of that. If I could zero in on kind of a conviction that's developed in me around this, it's all around confessional community. I, over the years of being a pastor, and we saw this in the work we did together at Gateway, the power of confessional community, that's like the secret sauce of the church, where you can be in community and be open with what you're struggling with and what's going on in your life. That's where the most change and transformation happens. I say that with some context because you look at the way churches are typically structured and senior leadership, the pressure that they're under, there really isn't a safe place for senior leaders to engage in confessional community, especially if they cross some sort of moral boundary. And you look at Bill and what he went through, phenomenal man, phenomenally gifted man. It looks as if at some point in the past he crossed some sort of a line and didn't have a safe place to talk about that without losing his job. So what's he do? He keeps him to himself. He prays his private confessions and tucks his head and keeps going. That's dangerous. It's highly dangerous. And if I could wave a magic wand of churches across the country, it would be that elder boards would provide a kind of a pre-written agreement of if you stumble, if you click on a website you shouldn't have clicked on, if you have a lapse of judgment that's of a little more serious nature, here's how it's going to happen if you bring it to us. If you confess it, here's what we're going to do so that it can be done in a safe way. And it doesn't mean you're going to get paraded across the church, and it doesn't mean you're going to get shown the front door. I think we're missing out on some of our best leadership that could be happening in the church due to an absence of that, due to the fact that Christian leaders essentially have to make a choice of if they have some sort of lapse of judgment, are they just gonna lose not only their job but probably their whole career. And I think that's unfortunate. So my wish would be that Bill would have had a safe place to do that. And even today, I wish that he would. I'm sad that it's still not fully disclosed, because I think he could be leading us in a way of here's how you deal with sin. Here's how you deal with when you've made mistakes. Here's how you confess it. Here's how you work the steps. Whatever you're going to do, and we're missing out on that as a church, and the church really needs it. So that to me is one of the biggest lessons. There's all sorts of things you could learn from that whole mess, but boy, if the church could be a place that is safe for leaders, to be able to be confessional, it would be phenomenal for all of us.
Well, I think that's a wonderful thought, and certainly, praying for those that are leading there now, and even those that were wounded through all that happened.
A lot of pain.
And even, I think a lot of what we've seen in culture is trying to be even more aware of power dynamics and right sizing some of those things. Well, thank you for sharing even just a little bit of your tumultuous experience. And now you're doing something very different. I want to talk about some of what you're doing with communication. Talk about that for a moment.
Yeah, well, I've been fortunate to be able to participate on different teaching teams over the years with you and one of those. And I have a lot of passion around the whole teaching ministry of the church and helping teachers be effective in what they're doing. And especially in our day and age, it's challenging. I can see teachers kind of go from one rail to the other, where it's like, I'm going to be biblical. I'm going to straight talk through a book of the Bible, to the other end of the spectrum, where it's like, I'm going to be culturally relevant. I'm going to be funny, whatever. Well, we live in a day where we need churches that are grounded, and we need to do both. We need to be, deeply biblical and grounded and solid in our thinking. And we need to communicate in winsome and effective ways that gets people's attention. So one of the things I'm doing in this next leg of the journey is developing some consulting and training around communication, and specifically, to business leaders as well. But what I'm most passionate about is ministry leaders and how they can increase their effectiveness around teaching and communicate. I'm pretty excited about it.
That's fantastic. I feel like that's obviously a skill that needs to continually be refined. Maybe give us a couple of nuggets of what you've been helping pastors with, or even some of the folks in the business world. What are some helpful tools for communication?
Developed basically a 3-session, I'll use the word program, that I'm doing over Zoom with leaders across the country. But it's broken in kind of, I'll give 2 of the main segments. One of them is the arc of your message. And this is something that it took me a while to kind of find my way into, but really thinking about what are you trying to accomplish in the beginning of a message, the middle of a message, the end of a message. And I think it's something that's often overlooked. It can be done in a couple of different ways. You have on the one end, kind of these 2 extremes I was talking about. People are just like, I'm just going to start teaching. I'm going to come out of the gates and turn to 1 Peter and let's go. And then on the other end, it's like the stand-up comic who gets up there for the first 15 minutes is cracking jokes so that he or she can connect, And one of the things I discovered, and actually goes back to my sales training. Years ago, I was in sales, and they would train you on how to deal with objections. You're selling a product and someone gives an objection. How do you deal with it? And some of the language, some of your listeners will probably be familiar with this, is a strategy called feel, felt, found. And it's when somebody has an objection, you essentially say, I understand how you feel. And I understand that you feel the way because I have felt the same way, but let me show you what I've found. And what's interesting is in the years of teaching I was doing is I discovered that the messages where I'd have people come up to me afterwards and say, I felt like you were speaking directly to me. It's when I effectively did the feel, felt, found, where the first portion of the message, and I would take maybe a third of the message to talk about how this topic makes you feel and what I have felt. And before we get into what we found to really make it happen, you could be teaching about something like, say you're teaching about disappointment with God or disillusionment with God. You can take that first portion of the message and say, I understand how you feel with disappointment or disillusionment with God. I have felt the same way with disappointment and disillusionment with God. But let me tell you what I found. Boy, that sets it up much better than just going to, let me tell you what I found. Or if you're doing something dry, you're going to teach on, theology, you're going to teach on the Trinity. You can spend the first section talking about, it's confusing, isn't it? 3 and 1 and 1 and 3, and why does it matter? And I wondered why it mattered to me, and I have felt the same way, but let me tell you what I found. If you take them through that process and do that effectively, it sets up their desire to hear what you have to say. So anyway, I like working with communicators on helping craft that aspect of the message. So that's on the content side. The other is really on how to deal with skills, just communication skills. Adrenaline does a funny thing to a person when they get up on a stage, as you know, and all of a sudden you're talking fast, you're talking loud, and you're pacing back and forth, and you're over exaggerating different things, and it affects your trustworthiness because it's disingenuous. And so I work with communicators to say, okay, what are some of the skills that can help you stay grounded and centered, and just some of the ways you use eye contact or arm movement or your voice and such, that actually it's an interesting thing that happens when you master those skills. It actually helps you be centered, it helps you be more focused, and it actually helps in the delivery of the content itself. So that's a little bit of a taste of what are some of the skills that you can develop that helps you be a centered communicator, and then how do you package your content, for lack of a better word, so that it can really connect with your audience.
Well, it's called Nail It Communication, and
Yes.
You can find it right there on the web. I love this idea: clear, confident, concise. I'm excited for what you're doing. Thanks for sharing with us, and enjoyed our time together at Gateway, and enjoying the time on the pickleball court now.
Let's play next week. I'm ready.
Let's do it. Thanks, Rick.
Thanks, Eric. Take care.